When we look at ceramic practice in Western Australia from 1970 to the present, we can say that there are three main streams within which people have produced work: tableware, studio and ceramic sculpture. The scope of these three categories allows for all of the opportunities that clay has to offer. The opportunity to generate income from a craft practice with a long tradition of connectedness between skilled makers and the society around them. The opportunity to pursue innovation and excellence in the aesthetic qualities of form and surface. And the opportunity to connect through sculptural work with the particular theoretical or philosophical issues of the day. Changes in tableware over a period of time can tell us much about the society that has produced them. Changes that reflect stylistic influences, new technologies, and of course changing eating habits. Tableware in the 70s was dominated by the ethos of the craft revival. To be handmade was almost enough in itself. The level of interest in ceramics amongst the wider community ensured that potters were appreciated and well patronised. Maria Phillips became a full-time professional potter in 1974, operating from her backyard studio in Karrinyup. She was able to support her family from the proceeds of 2 kiln loads a week, developing once-fired glazes as an important component of her business-like approach. Her aim was to make pottery that combines the useful with the aesthetically pleasing, serene and wholesome. Ian Dowling pursued the country lifestyle often associated with craftspeople in the 70s. In 1977, after training with Joan Campbell at her Bathers Beach studio, Ian and his wife established their first pottery in a 120-year-old National Trust stone barn at Greenough Flats. All his materials were collected raw from local sources. The light salting that occurred in his wood-fired kiln was from using salt-drenched local timber gathered from the coastal paddocks surrounding him. Another aspect of the craft revival was in its respect for tradition. Janet Cavesi, arriving in Western Australia in 1959, brought with her from England a commitment to fine tableware in the English tradition, which won her in 1977 the Harrison Mayer Award for Functional Pottery. She says, "Design in pottery is not a matter of drawing a picture, but a combination of factors: proportion and consideration of function and the way that liquids behave, and what looks good." Gary Zeck, originally a painter drawn into ceramics during a residency at Fremantle Arts Centre in 1974, like Ian Dowling, also took the country option on a property south of Perth at Serpentine. But like many by the mid-80s, had a much better understanding of that particular ideal.
When I was down at Serpentine, it was a very complete lifestyle because the block had a couple of acres of fruit trees and some good growing loam for vegetables and potting clay and a stream. In fact, it was really very hard work. We'd be up at first light, chop a barrel load of wood, milk the cow, get the kids off to school, light fires, the hot water system and all that sort of stuff, and then down to the potting shed and begin making pots. And then of course in the summer the shed was stinking hot, and in the winter the bowl of water for the throwing was actually iced over, so it was, and the clay itself was almost down to freezing point. So it was very hard, but it did test me and also give me the sort of conviction I needed for what I was doing.
The romance of the craft revival had definitely faded by the early 80s, and many looking to a career in ceramics did so with the understanding that this would most likely be achieved in combination with teaching or occasional support from the government funding bodies. The look of tableware changed considerably in the 80s to become much more colourful. The introduction of imported low-fired colours allowed for a much greater use of brushwork and colour within designs. White stoneware clays became more readily available, and there was a greater use of red earthenware to complement the low-fired colours. Ulla Zettergren's crisp designs on slip-over earthenware reflect her Swedish origins. Plum Pottery was a successful partnership between potter Ruth Elder and designer Rosalind Drake, which operated from 1986 to 1992 from the Tresillian workshops in Netherlands. Slip casting in this period also meant that the form of tableware could be much more dynamic and sophisticated. Jenny Dawson created many memorable settings within which the influence of design movements such as Memphis could be incorporated. But it wasn't just in the lower fired clays that colour and design became of more interest. Alison Brown's squared-off studio-line dinnerware, developed in the mid-80s, introduced a much more dramatic look with its combination of blocked colour and light brushwork. Jonathan Hook established his studio pottery at Denmark in 1974, and his flame design dinnerware, first made in 1986, is still popular 13 years later. In the late 80s, there was a lot of enthusiasm for the arts and industry to work together. Jill Smith, coming from a background as a potter but with a flair for new technology, forged lasting links between Australian fine china and local potters and designers. Her experimentation with CAD/CAM software, adapting them for design and decoration of pottery, resulted in commissions for herself and several other craft designers for designs on Australian fine china's Macquarie collection. The 1990s has seen Mallorca ware take over as the most popular decorative style for locally produced tableware. It was in 1990 that Kate and Gigi Cozzi arrived in Western Australia from the Italian village of Vietri sul Mare to establish La Mallorca in Norfolk Street, Fremantle. The success of their business has been an inspiration to many, and the recent opening of their new extension a great celebration for potters and townspeople alike. In 1991, 3 local potters, Jenny Dawson, Pip Drysdale and Janice Heston, worked for 4 months at the 400-year-old De Ruta Grazia Mallorca factory in Italy. This was made possible with arts funding assistance. On their return, Jenny Dawson, working with ceramic chemist Mike Kuznick, adapted what she had learnt to Australian materials. While I have sketched out some of the particular changes in tableware design, it is true to say that throughout the whole period from 1970 to the present day, stoneware has continued as the most practical and enduring. Jean Robbins in 1974 was the first artist in residence at the Fremantle Arts Centre, and her strong practice as well as her teaching reflected the same reverence for pottery as she had observed in Japan and China. Ian and Jenny McRae's Beaufort Pottery Days from 1979 to 1983 produced a fine range in the Fair Isle pattern, while Fergus Stewart's wood-fired stoneware exemplified fine craftsmanship. Gary Zeck and Ian Dowling continue their careers in stoneware production today. Ian moved from Greenough to the Margaret River area in the southwest in 1982, and after working with other potters, established his highly successful Margaret River Pottery in 1992. Gary combines his functional range with one-off large pots and the occasional public art commission. All have moved with the times in regard to public taste and changing culinary habits. From mulled wine warmers in the 70s to noodle bowls and sushi plates in the 90s, the makers of tableware continue to contribute to what Norman Bryson refers to as the culture of the table. sensitive to and recording in these everyday items the changes in ideology, economics and technology. The idea of the studio potter who produces one-off or limited edition works for exhibition and sale in gallery settings has been encouraged and supported since 1970 by both federal and state arts funding bodies. These are the people whose pursuit of excellence is often at great cost to themselves, but whose success nationally and internationally reflects in an important way on the state and the nation as a whole. But funding dollars are very limited, and for most studio potters, the production of exhibition work is balanced with other related activities, such as high production tableware or teaching. Pip Drysdale and Sandra Black both attest to the fact that Western Australia can produce potters of international renown. Pip's focus has always been on the landscape of Western Australia and the use of the ceramic surface to carry imagery both reminiscent of painting yet unique to the ceramic tradition. Her most recent exhibition in February 1999 was a high point for all potters in Western Australia, with record prices being paid by an appreciative local audience. Sandra Black has had a more diversified practice with several studio lines including underglaze decoration on throneware, manipulated and assembled bone china, and pierced and carved porcelain, for which she is particularly well known. Sandra has also been an important part of teaching teams at a number of art schools. But let's look back at the 70s, when John Fawcett, a towering figure in ceramic education as in life, exhibited pots of a size never before seen in Perth. The challenge for him was in size and majestic form, with decoration undertaken in a simple and direct way. Heather McSwain, teaching across town at Fremantle Tech, had a much finer sense of design, one which she handed on to her many students. Maxine Lindsay was one of those early students who went on to exhibit regularly at the Fremantle Arts Centre throughout the 80s. Maxine's most memorable works are her hand-coiled blackware pots, carved and burnished with perfect symmetry and precision. Michiko Love began her training at Fremantle Tech in 1966 with Frances Cotai, but was also a student of Heather McSwain. Her greatest interest is in the glazed surface, and while she is best known for her white crackle glaze, the delicate throwing into the clay body of coloured oxides exhibits perfectly her highly refined aesthetic. Eileen Key's career was well established in the years before 1970, and she continued to exert influence and to create important work right through to her death in 1992. Her abiding interest was in the raw materials of Western Australia and the use that could be made of them in the production of ceramics which were truly of this place. Her work doesn't conform to the usual notion of ceramic beauty. Instead, I see much in it that is profoundly religious. In a conversation with Eileen in 1989, she recalled being in England after the war and listening to a minister saying that God put the minerals in the earth for man's use, not to kill mankind, referring particularly to uranium. The hurried simplicity of many of her forms might be understood as a deliberate act to present the colours and effects of the minerals without the undue interference or vanity of the human hand. There were other younger potters working in the 70s whose work reflected another sort of reverence. the Zen philosophy of Japanese ceramics, sweeping through the whole of Australia as part and parcel of an alternative lifestyle. Some Perth potters, most notably Jane Barrow, pursued that aesthetic in Japan, while others like Frank Morris moved to Denmark in the southwest of the state, where he built and shared kilns with Jonathan Hook. Frank's work from that period, made from clays dug and mixed locally, thrown off-centre, a deceptively difficult thing to do well, and then decorated and glazed in loose brush strokes of delicate colour, represent an aesthetic not often seen in Western Australian ceramics. Biela Kotai became a full-time potter in 1971, a year after the death of his father Francis, who in his teaching career at Fremantle Tech from 1954 until 1969 had created enormous enthusiasm for pottery. Biela, like John Fawcett, makes big pots. If you want to say something, you say it as loudly as you can. In 1975, a workshop with American potter Don Reitz at Joan Campbell's workshop introduced Biela to the use of added decorative coils. In more recent years, his masterfully thrown pots have been added to with overlapping layers of clay, giving the impression of a second skin. Marc Sauvage is credited as bringing into the ceramic community in the early 80s bright colours from America. He used these with his highly refined design aesthetic to create works which combine the effects of primitive firing techniques such as raku and smoking with highly controlled areas of brilliant colour. Graham Carr originally trained as an architect and is now best known for his leather sculpture done in collaboration with his wife Tanya. During the 80s, his cleanly designed ceramics show his interest in form over decoration, with great care taken in the detailing, the edges, corners, and how surfaces meet. Porcelain clay has been used mostly by women potters. Jo Reed and Mary Wallace are two women from quite different backgrounds who have used porcelain in their work to great effect. Jo is largely self-taught and one of those few potters whose studio practice has not been combined with teaching. Her work has sold mainly through private galleries such as New Collectibles in East Fremantle, and for several years in the late 80s, her Silver Street Studio Gallery in Fremantle was a popular location for craft exhibitions combining ceramics and jewellery. Mary Wallace retired from teaching in 1992 and has established with her husband a home and studio gallery in the Denmark area, where she produces carved and decorated one-off pieces exploiting the special translucent qualities of porcelain. As well, she has a production line of tableware. Alison Brown, Gary Zeck and Ian Dowling have already been mentioned as producers of tableware. They also combined this with one-off exhibition pieces. Ian's 1989 exhibition showed work which was heavily carved in regular geometric patterns. Alison's work is about colour and brushwork on thrown bowls. Success for studio potters depends to a great extent on the gallery network, both locally and further afield, to present their work in an appropriate way and to the right audience. Over the years, Fremantle Arts Centre, with its workshops, craft fairs and well-stocked shop, has been an important supporter of working potters. Craft West provides an important means for local work to be promoted into national and international circuits. In the private sector, Nora Ort at Perth Galleries is one who has presented many fine exhibitions. While in the earlier years of the 70s, Ree Haymans at the Old Fire Station Gallery and then the Undercroft was always a great champion of ceramics. Ceramic sculpture is nearly always made in conjunction with some other related activity. Sandra Black's Fletcher Award-winning work, prompted by her personal encounter with and contemplation of the nature of grief, was done out of a solid base of studio practice. For many, teaching is the partner activity. John Teschendorf's memorial series from 1989 were made after he began teaching at Curtin University in 1985. For others, like Ulla Zettergren, there is a good balance struck between her tableware production work and figurative studies carrying gentle tales of human experience. The best way to look at ceramic sculpture, undertaken since 1970, is to look at the basic inspiration for the work. This gives us 4 categories: organic or landscape-inspired work, architectural or formal design relations, the interest in reworking the idea of the vessel so central to the ceramic tradition, and the area of personal and social commentary. In the first category, Joan Campbell stands out as somebody deeply inspired by the natural world, both in its material aspects, the processes of clay and fire, and the form of the natural environment, particularly the small beach immediately adjacent to her studio in Fremantle. More recently, Helen Manson has also looked to the coastline for inspiration, but her looking includes man-made elements of the fishing industry. Mab van Deth, working from the mid-60s through to the late 80s, produced sculptural forms made from locally dug clays and tools picked up in the bush. Textured wood paddles creating a stippled surface for her contemplative forms where line and shadow are the dominant elements. Robert Bell's 1974 series refer not only to the rock forms along the Albany coastline, but also the idea of space both within and between solid forms. There is a sense of architectural monumentality about them, the idea of a primitive formalism bridging the organic and the architectural worlds. Joss Gregson's series from the mid-80s, on the other hand, are much more understandable in their architectural references. The mid-80s was a period of philosophical turmoil for the craft world. As the tediously banal yet incredibly destructive art-craft debate tore apart many of the connections which had helped to develop ceramic practice up to that time. People were encouraged to deconstruct the vessel, so central to the ceramic tradition, and at the same time so annoyingly functional. Frank Morris's winning entry at the 1986 City of Perth Craft Awards was a turning point, infuriating many who saw a new brand of theory overtaking the old, and this one had little to do with glaze recipes. Others who continue to work around the idea of the vessel as form and surface rather than a primarily functional object are Jenny Dawson and Bev Gallup. Bev Gallup has moved through various stylistic phases often related to art and its history. Her work is hand-built, elaborately constructed with heavily decorated surfaces employing texture as well as colour. Jenny Dawson has had a long interest in the way that surface decoration can alter our perception of the form of a vessel. Mike Calder's Little Parakeet from 1989, and now in the Art Gallery's collection, places a simple bowl into a rock-like sculptural setting, tying the two disparate elements together with swathes of brilliant colour. By far the biggest group within ceramic sculpture are those who employ the medium for personal or social commentary. Dave Hunt, while his career was really as a teacher at Perth Tech, also made some memorable works in the American West Coast funk tradition. His series of slip-cast pesticide cans on roller skates were first exhibited at the Undercroft Gallery in the Somethings Clay exhibition in December 1980. He was drawing people's attention to the way in which the overuse of chemical controlling agents, supposedly done for our benefit, are in fact killing the ones we love most, our kids. Leon Pritchard, teaching in the same period as Dave but at the then West Australian Institute of Technology, also made work which often carried a critical or ironic perspective. Ceramic Degree expressed his personal exasperation at teaching students whose prime interest in his course was to get a piece of paper which would allow them to teach. Gender issues crop up in the recent work of Robin Lees. Constructed from multiple thrown pieces, the teapots, platters and more elaborate sculptures present conflicting images and three-dimensional cartoons of women, often around the theme of housework. Valeska Wood's work in the Terra Incognita exhibition in 1989 deals with the social construction of gender, and in particular the role that the cult of the Virgin plays in that. Her inclusion of found objects and the use of paint rather than glaze poses the question, what are the boundaries of ceramic sculpture? Are they in the material and its processes, or are those just a starting point? Myra Stafford's elaborate and colourful constructions are narratives about her life. Living by the ocean, it's her relationship with the coastline which she is explaining through subtle integrations of the figurative with coastal imagery and forms. Her childhood, one shared by many West Australians, is reconstructed with simple statements of security, order and friendship. Packing Up 87 again makes simple but universally felt statements of grief common to everyone whose parents have died. Narrative is also important in the mid-70s sculptural vignettes of life on the Warburton Mission done by Eva Saunis. Eva is one of a group of women who were inspired by Eileen Keyes and her direct approach to clay. These were women who made work from the ground up, always with huge enthusiasm and great generosity in their teaching and encouragement of others. Eva visited the Warburton Mission twice in the mid-70s when her daughter was working there, and her acutely observed studies of Aboriginal life are disarming in their candour. Paul Council's sculpture in the 1990s doesn't use realistic images, but instead he employs symbolism to make powerful statements about the condition of Aboriginal people in Australia today. Using the elements of clay and steel to symbolise Aboriginal and white Australians respectively, he is using his practice to engage with and bring into the public arena Australia's most pressing social need, that of reconciliation with Aboriginal Australians. Ceramics is an art form which combines imagination and skill with technology to produce a vast array of aesthetic and practical possibilities. In the production of work which is new and to the highest possible standards, the ceramic chemist is a potter's greatest ally. There is hardly a potter in this state who has not called on Mike Kuznick at some time or other for his expert advice. A ceramic chemist who came here from Europe after the war, Mike has worked across industry and education and through community-based organisations across the state. The National Ceramic Conference here in Perth for the first time in 1999 gives an opportunity for all those involved in ceramics, whether as makers, educators, institutional supporters or the general public, to remember the resources our recent history has provided. All these are building blocks for the further development of this most enduring of art forms,